Everybody, we're going to start just in a second here. So welcome to the home of PJ Raval and myself.
Thank you.
Yes. For our second conference on the couch. Some housekeeping stuff. There's food, there's coffee, there's tea in the kitchen. Feel free at any time to go get some. Bathroom in the hall over here. Feel free to use it as you need. And then, if you were here yesterday, this is going to be a repeat, but for those of you who weren't, just to say a few words about what we're doing and why I'm doing this conference on the couch. And basically, it sort of comes from my personal background. I have a PhD, I'm an academic, but I also, of course, do festival stuff and programming for festivals, and really wanted to bring that sort of art world and academic world that I'm a part of together. Because oftentimes those worlds are kept apart. You know, academics write about artists, but they don't meet those people, or they go to the conferences with other academics and aren't talking to the artists, and vice versa. The artists kind of get written about or get written at and don't necessarily meet the people that are talking about them. So I wanted this to be a space for artists and academics and all different kinds of people to really have conversations about things that they had in common and common interests. And then the other sort of thing was I wanted it to be in a living room, this living room in particular, to really make it more of a conversation than your typical conference where you have your table with a bunch of people sitting on it, there's a spotlight on them or whatever, and a bunch of people sitting back here in the audience, and there's this kind of remove. I wanted it to feel intimate, I wanted it to feel like a family setting and a conversational kind of setting, and I thought, and I hope that this living room would facilitate that, and it seemed to yesterday, so hopefully it will do that again. And then the last thing to say is that all of the panels for the week are kind of leading into the programming. So today's panel topic, of course, is Your Nostalgia is Killing, Strike Through, Thrilling, about queer art and HIV. Which is leading into a performance by John Moletress tomorrow about JARMAN, who passed away 21 years ago as of yesterday, February 19th. So it's kind of a little off sort of anniversary, I guess, of that. Instead of celebrating celebration is the wrong word, but commemorating the 20th anniversary and the day of, we're like slightly off, but we're the Outsider Festival, so why not be slightly off? And so it's with JARMAN in mind and with the history of queer art and HIV that we're doing this panel. And I will hand it over to Andy Campbell, who is our moderator.
Hi, thank you for coming. And I'm just going to say a few quick things before we get rolling. We were also supposed to be joined by Lalitha Gopalan and Ellen Spiro today, both of whom I guess could not make it. So our panel is woefully solely male. I think that's kind of part of the conversation as we kind of continue forward. But I also want to kind of address where this panel comes from, or where the name for this panel comes from, which is this poster which was designed by Vincent Chevalier and Ian Bradley Perrin, and the poster was designed for Poster Virus, their Canadian artist duo, and the title of the poster is obvious. Your Nostalgia is Killing Me, and it imagines a teenager's bedroom, and all over the walls of this bedroom are ACT UP posters, Grand Fury posters. There's movie posters for Philadelphia and Derek Jarman's Blue, someone who we'll talk about, and probably a work that we'll end up talking about. Justin Bieber wearing an ACT UP t-shirt. Images of ACT UP rallies, Bono's Inspired campaign, the United Colors of Benetton campaign that depicts David Kirby and his family moments after his passing. And there's a little teddy bear on the ground and an open laptop on the bed. And their point, which is not left unconsidered in this panel, is that sometimes in the retelling of history, the present moment also gets kind of passed over or bypassed. And I thought that might be a little too cynical of a narrative, so I kind of changed the title of their poster to Your Nostalgia is Thrilling Me. Because actually what I'd like to do collectively in this room, and with the help of our guest today, is to build a line between historical activist moments around HIV and AIDS and current activist moments with HIV and AIDS, and think about the ways in which those things can kind of inform each other. But before kind of getting too deep into that, I want each of our kind of couchies, our couch potatoes, to kind of introduce themselves, their work that relates to HIV and AIDS and to activist communities, and how they see themselves as a part, or maybe even not a part of these communities. And so, if you don't mind, maybe we'll begin with you, John. Since you, is that okay? Since you're performing tomorrow, and Derek Jarman's a kind of clear through line here.
Hi. I'm John Moletress, and I just arrived yesterday from Washington, D.C. So this is my first time in Austin, so I thank you so much for bringing me here, because it's a lot warmer too. So I consider myself a queer performance artist, although it's my discipline's kind of morphed a bit from theater to dance into video editing. And then all of those mediums have kind of collided in this project, JARMAN, All This Vanishing Beauty. And I also am a university professor based in Washington, D.C. So, it's interesting because I've been working on this project. We first wrote a script, and it's with playwright Fouratt. And this was back in August 2013, so this has been an ongoing process, and it's taken a couple of different forms. We did a workshop April 2014, and the current performance looks nothing at all like that workshop. That workshop was very character, narrative driven, and I was unsatisfied with it, as I usually tend to be when I go back into the room to work again and start changing things. So I toured Europe in October and November with the performance, and it was this radically different performance. It's interesting because regarding AIDS culture, I don't necessarily think I try to activate it within my work. But as I've been doing the performance more and more, because it's such a large part of Derek Jarman's life and history, I found that I've sort of situated myself in terms of my own personal history more about what the work is about, and my own engagement with my own personal history, and sort of graduating from undergrad and not knowing what the hell I was going to do in life, and becoming this big circuit party kid and doing lots of drugs and being a part of that scene. The illness, the specter of illness was always sort of surrounding all of that, but at the same time I always felt that the circuit party scene was so much about wearing masks, so masking with either glitter or substances or things like that, but it was always sort of there, but we never wanted to really actually acknowledge it. And then just part of my group, we were never really sort of punched in the face about it. And I think that is sort of how AIDS culture, HIV appears in the show. That's really sort of it's this illness that's looming over everything, but I don't ever want to try to, or I haven't tried to sort of say that it's this or that, or it must appear in this way, or it must appear in that way, or it must be talked about or discussed in this way or that way. So the performance is really kind of it's a text that's written that takes this young artist's journey of discovering himself as a gay man, and also as an artist, by the discovery of Derek Jarman, and that's how they kind of sort of morph together. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Sam.
Hey, my name is Sam. Karen, if you wanted to play that slideshow on the television, that'd be great. I know I'm making it up. So I'm just going to play some random pictures that I kind of felt pertaining to this kind of discussion in some of my previous work. This topic is actually really close to home for me because I am from Austin, but I lived in Portland for a couple years, where I actually received my HIV diagnosis when I was about 21. A year after that, going through some really difficult times, I moved back to Austin, and one of the closest friends that helped me with that through the time is one of the first persons that I knew that was transgender. And it really kind of fucked up my world. And dealing with, my diagnosis and even my own identity as a queer person, dealing with the death of someone that I, really kind of helped me with my own journey was really interesting. And then about 6 months later is when QueerBomb rolled around for the first year, and I kind of jumped on board with that because a lot of people said that it would be something that I was really interested in at the time. And I've always been kind of a fighter. I've always been kind of punk rock, and I've always liked propaganda and activism. And QueerBomb really kind of set the tone to where I really understood what queer liberation meant. Even before AIDS and before ACT UP, I got really interested in the movement of, Stonewall liberation, the movements of Gay Liberation Front, tactics that started our gay liberation that were anti-assimilation based, that were more anarchist based, that stood to call out our society for things that they were doing wrong to our people. ACT UP in specific was something that really caught my attention because of the experiences that I was going through. Moving back to Texas and dealing with social services as a person of lower income, I had a lived experience of how difficult it is to actually be kind of poor and to receive HIV services, and you don't really understand what it's like in today's present time until you actually have to deal with that. The services that I've received in Travis County have mostly been great, but there's been times where I feel that I was really disrespected by a lot of the staff there. I feel that they really kind of undermined my situation, that they kind of looked the other way about the things that I was dealing with as a poor person. I don't want to say poor because I think there's a lot of negative connotations to that. As a lower income, younger individual, I think they really did kind of undermine the seriousness of that situation. And so I think societally in the present day situation, there's a lot of kind of pieces to this puzzle of dealing with our current situation for HIV and AIDS, and even in Texas, just social services and medical services for lower income people and queer people in general. I feel that it really kind of opened my eyes to a perspective that I don't think I would have ever understood without actually living through this. With a lot of the stuff happening in Texas and, a lot of political work, there is a lot that still has to be done. I feel that a lot of younger people, myself included, they don't really understand the situations of what it was like to deal or to live in a time where a lot of people were dying around them. When the AIDS epidemic was a really big crisis and there was a lot of serious things happening, I feel that as it's become more of a manageable disease and as medications have become more available, that a lot of people don't really understand the seriousness that still exists behind it. I feel that a lot of our social services kind of work in the same way. I feel there's a lot of people that have the right intentions and they're doing the right kind of work, but that they still don't know what it's like to actually live through those experiences. And because of that, they sometimes can do things or react in certain ways that are not friendly to the people that actually need them. I also feel that sometimes the people that are actually receiving these services and the people that need them the most are the ones that aren't given the voice to actually make effective changes and to feel that the things that they do and the things that they experience actually matter. So because of this, I've really come through to really respect a lot of activism in the past and to really focus on a lot of that imagery and what it means to really represent yourself and your situation in times of crisis, to really find what is necessary to either call out people or to express your disconcern for things that are happening. I think, in the present day times, a lot of younger people, they kind of, we're kind of taught not to be as angry. And a lot of people I feel are really passive about these situations. And I think in times of serious crisis, in times where, your livelihood is at risk or when your community is still facing really unjust social inequality, that anger is necessary, and the things that you feel and the things that you've experienced are always there to kind of put other people into check. So I think as an activist, this has really hit close to home because I've been in a lot of situations where this was life or death for me, and me fighting for my own rights or for the rights of my friends and my community is really is what matters. And when you're kind of in those situations where you have nothing else to lose, you're gonna have every reason to fight for what you believe in. So that's kind of and all of these images are things that I've kind of came into with works that I've been doing as I've gotten more into these activist movements. This one specifically is from the Q Austin. I kind of wanted to show that because I want to talk about that a little bit with kind of current strategies and some of the things that our nonprofits are doing here in town that are really kind of representing some good work.
Yeah, great. I hope that I'm hoping that we'll kind of circle back around to that. Absolutely. And also, Sym, by the way, is just a prolific screen printer as well. Has a prolific screen printing business as well, which is really, really phenomenal. I'll make my stakes clear before handing it off to Jim, who has to go last in the line, which is that I used to I was born in 1982, so I was born funny. So I along with many others in my generation don't know a world without HIV and AIDS, and I think that that's a really important mental psychological organization, and there's a specificity to that, I think. Myself in my own work, I've taken a traditional academic path. I'm an art historian by trade. But a lot of what I focus on is around activist moments and movements and queer subcultures. And so for a while I taught a class called Video AIDS at Texas State University, which was about video, art, and the pandemic. Which I saw as kind of an activist move of sorts, in that it actually introduced students to, and the whole purpose of that course was to have screenings. I mean, if I could avoid talking and do more showing, that was the idea actually. And both times it resulted in an exhibition put on by students that really engaged with their current day situation, issues, the way that they interact and think about kind of HIV and AIDS activism historically. I've also written on status, specifically on undetectability as a status, as a new form of identity that we're dealing with now. So it used to be seropositive, seronegative, and now that AIDS is, and we can talk about this, HIV and AIDS is a quote-unquote manageable disease, and we can talk about manageable for whom. But now that it's a kind of manageable disease, there's also this kind of category of undetectable, which means that you are seropositive, but that your counts are good, and you, if you took a test, you would not. It would not be the virus would not be detectable in your system.
There's also PrEP too.
And there's PrEP, and we will talk about PrEP too. In fact, I'm glad you showed the PrEP school image, because I'm hoping that we'll talk about that as well. But just so that you know my relationship to this material and my own stakes here as well. And I'm going to hand it over to Jim.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks you, Karen and PJ, for letting us into your very clean house. I suspect that someone came in and helped. I can't believe that these two gay men live exactly like this.
No, they do. They do.
It's always like that.
Well, you've just changed my whole understanding of who we are. As radical cultural workers. Because I think the basis of this panel is radical cultural workers who identify with gay, lesbian, trans, bisexual, or queer, or whatever I've left out. Please don't take offense, just put it in. Already you've challenged me. I'm born in 1941. So I have a long history. I came to New York in 1960. I lived in New York as an actor in a world of underground, very different kind of time. Now you know everything about everything. Back then, we really had an underground culture. There were a lot of gay and lesbian. I'm going to use the word gay and lesbian because that's what I'm most comfortable with. Please substitute whatever inclusive. I'll try to work in queer as much as I can. But in that time, it was gay and lesbian. Right? And it was very much a part, that world was very peppered with us. But the external world and the art world and the culture business, whatever, there were no gay men, there were no lesbians. There were no gay actors, there were no gay this, there were no gay that, whatever. And it was very confusing to me when I was like 18 years old, because I knew everyone I knew was gay or lesbian, and some of them were very successful, but they were all closeted. Very different world. What happened by happenstance, I was working in a major record label at the time for the president, and I lived around the corner from the Stonewall Bar, a really horrible place. It should never be become the symbol of our liberation. The symbol of our liberation is right there in the street in front of it, and the 30,000 people who say they were there, and their stories which they believe, and I think that that's an interesting thing to talk about when people begin to believe their own confabulations, and what does that mean? I think the positive side of that is that people want to really identify with that moment. The negative side is that we lose our real cultural history. And that's not what we're talking about today, but I'd love to talk to anyone who's interested in that. And just pushing ahead, I've lived a life. I've never been a professional gay, meaning I never made my living as, there's a lot of careers today for professional gays. And I think that that's a problem. Only that because, not the professional work, but the entry into that work and how it is tied into identification, which is usually an assimilationist ideal. I believe we're different. I believe we're essentially different. I'm using the word essential because most of the academics throw their hands in the air and stop here listening to me. But I do believe that we are essentially different. And the males and the females and all the gender expressions that we have are essentially different. We're also universal as human beings and having many common things in common with other people, but we have, my mentor, if you were to ask me who my mentor was, it would be Harry Hay, who I spent a lot of time with. And some lesbian separatists that pounded into me feminism in 1969. So those are the two, which didn't make me popular with gay men, by the way, or gay historians, by the way. But the idea of, when you spoke about the Gay Liberation Front, I'm one of the founding members of that group, we did not have an assimilationist point of view. We were not single issue. We were multiple issue. We identified around class, race, and gender. And at one point, many of the women left, not, as you might have read, because all the men were so sexist and misogynist, and many of us were, perhaps not all of us. They left because they wanted to be with women. It was a particular historical moment. They wanted to be with women, and I'll tell you a secret, that many of those lesbian separatists remained my friends, but we didn't do that in public, because it was a particular political moment. The Furies Collective lived down the street. And if you don't know the Furies Collective, write it down. Lived down the street from a commune that I was in Washington, D.C. It's those kinds of relationships which we don't hear about in sort of the official version of what happened. The artist, what could we be? We could be hairdressers, gardeners, cooks, shamans. I'm using that as a category of priest and all those other things. There were certain things that we were allowed to be without, if we didn't say who we were. But art was an all-inclusive category that seemed to be very class-based, but actually wasn't. The kind of culture that comes out of minority communities, we were there. We were there, not always visibly, but we were there, and many times the leading sort of light in those communities, but not identifiable. So I know that world of closet, and I was a very pretty young thing, and I always felt entitled. I hate this phrase because it's a Bruce Bauer phrase. I always felt entitled to my place at the table. I always felt that I could say whatever I wanted to say, even though if you looked at me and you were homophobic or you were a top, you'd see the sissy boy bottom, who liked to talk. But I never thought about myself in that particular way. I thought of myself as just, I had a right to say and be present. I'm also one of the people that grew up in a working class, Irish, Italian, Portuguese neighborhood, all Roman Catholic in Rhode Island. I was not damaged by the Catholic Church. Can't tell you why, except I never, from the very beginning, believed in certain things, like the Pope was God, or what they said. My relationship with whatever that higher power was, whatever that being. I didn't use that language then, but that's, and I don't know where I got that from. So I'm not one of those people terribly damaged by the Roman Catholics. And I think the institution is the most homophobic of any that we have. And this particular Pope that everyone thinks is so wonderful, I'm waiting him to get down on his hands and knees and beg forgiveness from the women and the gay and lesbian people and all of our other words that we call ourselves today, and apologizes for what they've done to us for centuries. And until he does that, they've always been good on poverty, and I support their work on poverty. That's a good spin. But until they acknowledge what they've done to us, I'm a little like Francis. I've done a lot of things in my life, and I've had a lot of happenstance experiences, meaning I was in a particular place at a particular moment, like being in front of the Stonewall. Just happened to be there. I was coming home from work. There were other incidents like that. ACT UP did not come about in 1987. AIDS first appeared in 1980. The gay men's health crisis was founded by a bunch of bourgeois white men who thought, if I do this, I won't get AIDS. This sort of desperate moment, and all but one of them is now dead. Or two of them, Larry's still here. And 2 weeks after that was founded, I founded a group called Wipe Out AIDS with my radical sort of feeling. That changed its name to HEAL, which was a more embracing, and it was an alternative way of looking at healing, an alternative way of looking at our bodies, and is almost totally left out of the history of AIDS, and it still exists around the world, this kind of way of looking at it. I went to when Larry called his meeting at the community center, to shout and scream at us and tell it was all our fault, which he always did, particularly young people. He was always blaming young people, And a lot of us in ACT UP were, particularly the women, were critical of the way Larry would always sort of hector, and me, and hector. Now, I know he's Saint Larry, and he's done very important things, and there's a myth about him, and there's a new HBO documentary which is about Saint Larry. But let me tell you, this queen was a difficult person, okay? With a loud mouth and a lot of privilege. And he used that privilege to get his message across. So I give him the kudos, but I think we have to be very careful about when we idolize people. Because my personal belief is when we talk about our contradictions, my contradictions, your contradictions, and that we allow, and we've done things, we've accomplished things in spite of our contradictions, that allows younger people and other people to say, rather than saying, oh, I couldn't do that, thinking, well, maybe I could do that, even if I don't have everything fucking together, whatever fucking together means.
Yeah,
okay?
right.
And so I went to that meeting, and I'm one of the founding members of ACT UP. I could talk and talk and talk about this. I just want to say one thing about Plague, the movie. It's a fairy tale. That's the nicest way I can put it. It's not truthful. It's not authentic. It's a traditional Hollywood arc.
You're talking about How to Survive a Plague,
yes.
right?
And this is sort of with the theme, is people are very romantic about that. They think that tells them the story.
Right.
Well, it does tell a story, not a true story, by the way, as a member of the Treatment and Data Tree. But it's a Hollywood movie, and people watch it and think they got it, That film is about people who, for the most part, except for Bob Rasky, who is the married man who does most of the talking and confronting, who is an incredible human being, was not a member of the collective that is in the film, but they pulled him in because he was such a romantic figure. But the role of the artist, Grand Fury gets all the credit, and they deserve a lot of credit for what they did. And Abram is still around and is still very articulate, and I hope he comes here and you all get to meet him. But the zines The gay zines, the pariah zine, the zines by people with AIDS, they're sometimes a reference, but that's what you really need to look for. About people just like yourself speaking from their own authentic experience of what it means, rather than the healthy person wanting to help you or wanting to be with you or leading, you know. The Denver Principles is another thing I want you to write down on your little piece of paper if you don't know about them. The Denver Principles, the second International AIDS Conference took place in Denver, Colorado. And Michael Callan on the West Coast and Bobby Campbell on the West Coast in San Francisco, a queen and a nurse and a person with AIDS. And Michael Callan, a queen with an incredible voice and a person with AIDS. Michael had founded the People with AIDS Coalition. There's no movie about that. Mm-hmm. There's no movie about Michael Callan. Mm-hmm. You know, an artist, a performer, a singer, a thinker, someone who grew through his disease into embracing feminism, and he loved lesbians much more than he did gay men, I'll tell you that, except for his boyfriend.
So can I actually interrupt you because I think you're raising a couple of good points that I want to pick up on and kind of get other folks' feedback as well, which is that we're in a moment where there seems to be some coalescing around canonizing certain groups, in particular ACT UP. I mean, there's How to Survive a Plague, but there's also, what was the other documentary? Say what? United in Anger.
Which is
Thank
a much
you.
better documentary because it's about flow.
Sure, but we're also seeing, so for example, Grand Fury posters entering the collections of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. We're
There's
seeing
a lot of ownership questions there, by the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But regardless of all of those complications, there seems to be arising or coalescing a kind of big lens focus on ACT UP, and I'm wondering, one, right, like how does ACT UP still provide food to continue forward in the present day activist moment, and two, how do we begin to tease out all the things that are being left on the periphery, right? I mean, for example, Sym, like in your work and in your clothing, you pull out the Silence Equals Death logo all the time, right? And so there's a literal connection between that Silence Equals Death collective
well, and even
logo.
For me with the pink triangles, even when I was younger and didn't even know why they existed, I knew that they were associated with gay culture in the late 80s and early 90s, even before I knew I was gay. And I always connected more with those as a symbolism for gay culture, even before then. And then, you know, as I started learning more about ACT UP and the symbolism that they were using and the pink triangle in correlation with the armbands of Nazi concentration camps and why they were using very strong images to refer to mass death and, you know, kind of their own situation at that time, I just found it really inspiring.
Right.
And I think, you know, with propaganda in specific, using tactics that really have strong imagery that make people stop and think about the things that are going on and that are physically existing around you, I think it's very strong, and I think it's a very important message when you can have something that's very concise and very simple.
So for you, when you're working with, say, the Q Austin, or when you're working with other organizations here in town, is ACT UP part of the conversation that you're having? Are other activist groups part of the conversation that you're having?
I'd say that ACT UP is part of that, but more so it's kind of more so the history behind it. So maybe not even specifically just ACT UP, but it's, you know, where did these conversations start? How did we start as activists in dealing with HIV and AIDS? You know, how we would not have, and you know, even with ACT UP, they contribute a lot of the social gains from ACT UP. I mean, a lot of the things that they did, they took care of their own communities when our government wasn't doing it. And so ACT UP contributed a lot to actually helping take care of the problem and to turn AIDS into managing HIV in a way that was very important. And I think the leadership and the tactics behind ACT UP essentially helped bring us forward into making AIDS something that people weren't dying from. And I think it's a very, very important.
And John, for you as someone who's pulling forth the history of Derek Jarman, are you connecting in your work with a kind of activist presence with Derek Jarman? Are you connecting with a sense of his many things, right? But what are you pulling forward, and
Yeah.
how are you kind of making new narratives out of?
Well, I think you actually said it, and I've been kind of delving deep into this idea of post-detectable culture, and I really kind of, live in that, and I'm on PrEP myself, and I think this idea of detectability and putting masks on and kind of pulling from his own love of Renaissance culture and things like that, and this idea of carnivals and masks. I'm trying to kind of make connections there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What about for you, Jim? I mean, how?
Well, it's interesting. Derek Jarman, who I'm going to be one of those name droppers. I'm alive. I knew some of these people, but I knew Derek Jarman because the Gay Liberation Front also existed in London, and Jarman was of the age that had an impact on him when it started. And they were a lot of art driven. It was founded by someone, Aubrey, who founded the Gay Men's Press over in London, which put out a lot of art books as well as theory books. So Jarman's world was, first of all, very much impacted by the early days of AIDS, when it was, for those of us who lived through those days, AIDS looked very, very differently. And people died every single day. The fact that the grief has never been really processed, the post-traumatic stress that many of us, I think, still carry through because it's never been processed. I think reading Anne's book about depression is a very good way to begin to look at some of the things, the way we stuff things in. But Jarman, I'm sorry, these are things I haven't thought about, or people I haven't brought to a consciousness level that I am, so I sort of pause for a moment. And there were so many of them, it wasn't just Jarman, it wasn't, there's huge, there's the people that you do know, and then there are all the people
that we don't.
Do you all know about the Estate Project? No. All right, I want you to Google the Estate Project, which is a repository of all the people all the artists, musicians, and writers who died of AIDS. They have a profile, a lot of their work is there. I didn't know we had this here. I was going to try to do a little template of some of the work, because Keith and General Idea are important, and Juan Lovich is important, and Hugh Jar is important, and Jack Smith, who died of AIDS, who predates all of those names, are important. But you know those names. But what you don't know, and Jarman's work, even his blind work, what you don't know is the thousands of younger artists who had not reached that point in their work or their process that you would be familiar with them. And it's really important to see how that was all wiped out. And so the nostalgia aspect of this is not nostalgic for me. It's more like sadness. And what's remarkable, by the way, and Outsider Fest in some ways is showing us this. Or you see someone like Shane, who I want you all to go see, who I really think is an important artist. His 10:30 on Saturday night, I think it is. That whatever was seeded by this generation or two generations of performers and artists who died, sprouted. Because we have all this culture today. I mean, New York is just full of queer culture. Right. And I thought it was over when the pyramid died. Literally died. Everyone died. Either heroin or AIDS, or heroin and AIDS, And so our ability to survive, and a lot of these artists are transgressive and non-assimilationist, I don't know where you young people get this from. I am so happy to see not everyone wants to be HRC, which I'm sure you're all going to the benefit tomorrow night.
Obviously. Yeah, I'll see you there. Yeah.
ACT UP picketed them a couple of weeks ago, because of who they take money from. And I just want to put in, I may be critical of some of the aspects of ACT UP, but ACT UP was the most successful 20th century activist movement in the world, and what it achieved. And you may debate that with me, but I want to just throw that in the middle of the room. What most people don't know is the role of women in ACT UP. And where you can learn about that is to look at Jim Hubbard and Sarah
Schulman.
Schulman, my friend whose name I can't remember.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sarah, I know you're very,
Yeah.
you're very.
He's gonna kick your ass for that.
Yeah.
But the important work there's 175 interviews that they did with
Yes.
people in ACT UP. If you can find the video, that's the best way to look at it, because I don't like the transcript of mine, said she. But look at the video, and you get the diversity of what ACT UP was, and the fact that ACT UP worked under consensus, not one person, no elected president, although some people would play that role, thank you, Larry. It was a consensus model. There were different little collectives within the thing, the affinity groups that did their own work. The success of ACT UP is really look at how it was structured, and it wasn't it was structured. It was queering the structure, quite frankly. Although there may be 5% of straight people in the room, and every time someone would get up at an ACT UP meeting and say, "There's a gay something related demonstration or something," some voice would come from them. "This is not a gay organization." That's how Queer Nation was born. And Maxine got tired of people saying you can't make announcements about gay things or lesbian things, or we didn't have trans things in the beginning, but trans things. She said, on Wednesday night we're meeting upstairs and we're going to talk about all the announcements that we can't make here at the meeting. That was how Queer Nation was founded. I'm sorry. I got so much fucking information.
No, actually, no. I mean, this is what I'm noticing as you're talking is like part of what you're doing is you're really attempting to throw out as much information about other moments, other folks who get kind of pushed to the periphery, and I think that's a worthy cause. But I'm wondering what historical activist moments have to tell us about our current moment. I mean, one of the things that you pulled forward was that the kind of flowering of queer art and culture now owes a great debt to the many folks who are with us and not with us anymore. But I'm also wondering the ways in which
Let me just add one more thing.
Yeah.
In the early days of gay liberation, a group was founded in Chicago called Third World Gay Liberation, and they had their 10-point platform, which was modeled on the Black Panther Party. And some of you may know that the Gay Liberation Front, and me in particular, got into a lot of trouble because we supported the Black Panther Party. And because people believed what they read in the media about what the Black Panther Party was about. And in fact, the Black Panther Party for me was about service in a community. And there's a new documentary coming out called The Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution, which I would suggest you all go see or watch if it's on HBO or whatever. It was just a Sundance, and it was profoundly affected me. I could not literally write for 2 days because it brought up so many memories of what really was as opposed to the mythology of what was. But Third World Gay Revolution, these 2 black queens came to New York to announce themselves. They were so far out that they were all done up, but they would not buy cosmetics because it was a capitalist game. Mm-hmm. So they would use pomegranate, and they had all this kind of skin stuff that they would put on. And I think that that's very queer. Mm-hmm. I think that, and it's today with the kind of, you'll see with Shane, it's really cheap art, cardboard, and how we can be very creative if we're poor and don't have access to what we should have access to. I'm not saying that the poverty model is something that we should aspire and support, but the reality is a lot of us live in it, and if we're artists and we're outsider artists, we have to figure out other ways to affordable natural uses. And so these queens came in and they were just like, they taught us a lesson about capitalism, a word we don't hear enough of today, although the triumph of capital is causing all of us to, I don't know about you, girl, but I mean, I'm barricaded in my apartment in New York City hoping that they don't come and break down the door of the landlord and kick me out because I have a rent-regulated apartment, 6 floors up, by the way. It's the only exercise I do get, me and my dog. So the moment is how we deal with the reality outside. The Wisconsin governor has now said there's no visitation rights. Mm-hmm. He's done away with the civil rights protections that were put in the law. This is the GOP. This is the Tea Party. This is that part of the Republican parties which is truly homophobic. It's going to take away and I think they probably will be successful with women's rights to choose. So how do we react? Well, we can all go into the cave, but gay people, lesbian people, trans people have never gone into the cave. We're just not capable of hiding anymore in that way. So we figure out from the ACT UP model, from the models that came before that, the before digital video, there was porta-packs, there were other things, the way that people made video, made agitprop tools to educate ourselves and just show ourselves who we were. We need to do that again. And that's why Outsider to me is so important. That's why I came to this, because I wanted to support it. Because we need to show who we are, not who HRC projects who we are, not to what the mass media projects, that we're all just like straight people. Well, some of us may be, and some of us may want to be just like straight people, and I'm not attacking them. I just want to save the sissy boys, the butch girls. I want all the gender expression to be able to be expressed without any kind of containment or labeling and making it into a heterosexual model. And I want the world to see who we are and what each person in this room, and you're all different in your gender expression and probably your identities, what you have to offer to the larger society, the role we've always had to play and wanted to play. This is Harry Hayes' thought. We have something to tell people. And when we deny who we are, and we deny our true spirit and the authenticity of who we are, and AIDS in some ways sort of blanketed I can't imagine coming out in 1990 or whenever you came out, when AIDS was being gay was dying. I can imagine I would want to run away from that word as quickly as I could. I think we need to reclaim some of these words today. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I just want to also make sure that we're inviting everyone else in as well, and maybe this is a good moment to reflect on the particular challenges of where we're at today. And in particular, I mean, there's a lot of conversations coalescing around PrEP, around pre-exposure prophylaxis, so Truvada,
PrEP and PEP.
And PEP, and there are specific challenges in talking generationally about that. I mean, part of ACT UP's platform and many activist platform was to be incredibly wary and skeptical of the pharmacological kind of corporate apparatus. And yeah, absolutely, and just really briefly that there's an economic aspect to this as well. I mean, without insurance, a year of PrEP is $13,000, right? And I think that there's a lot of economic I mean, you said capitalism is a word that doesn't get mentioned much. I mean, I think this is where the activist moment is right now, actually, around kind of economic justice, health, medication. Sym, please.
Well, essentially, too, I know that one of the big things that ACT UP focused on was the cost of medications at that time.
That's right.
And that's still a really big problem for antiretrovirals and for Truvada through Gilead. And one of the things, too, just speaking of the current time, the the nature of HIV has changed in the last 2 years alone. In 2012 is when the FDA approved PrEP for pre-exposure prophylaxis, and a year later is when they released the studies showing now that people who are undetectable pose minimal to no risk of transmitting the virus to others.
And clinical guidelines were only released in May,
and
right?
So that's 2 years that it's changing the game. But essentially, we still look at Texas in particular. The largest amount of people disproportionately affected by HIV and AIDS is going to be primarily young gay men in the MSM community, young gay men of color, about ages 18 to 29. In Texas, the new contraction rates are increasing by about 20% a year. The medical protocol to get state-funded healthcare to get on the medical assistance program, because essentially, I think a lot of people have a disconnect from the fact that they're like, oh, well, you can get programs that will get your medications. It's like, well, you have to see a doctor to get your medications. And in the state of Texas alone, if you want to be on the medical assistance program, you have to gross less than $10,000 a year in income. And if you want to get, and I've tried to even look
That's
at,
the maximum, 10,000.
10,000.
it has to be 90% of the federal poverty income to receive state-funded healthcare. And we did the opt-out through the marketplace. So essentially, you have to get on the marketplace. You have to receive government subsidies. You have to make a little bit over 11,500, and even then, with a person living with HIV, the amount of times that you have to see a doctor, get blood work and stuff like that, you have to be on the right kind of plan to where it actually costs a lot of money, even with the government subsidies. And then you look at Travis County in particular, we have one clinic to receive low-income services. So we have the David Powell Clinic, and it's literally one clinic here to receive subsidized HIV/AIDS services in Travis County in Central Texas. And they oversee about 2,000 patients a year with only 4 doctors. And the other tragic part of that is even with the healthcare marketplace, there's supposed to be an additional allotment of funding through Ryan White, but all of the funding for Ryan White through Travis County goes through David Powell. Right. And so there's a lot of times where a lot of people, they either don't feel welcomed by their services, they have financial gaps getting into them. David Powell will still see people on sliding scale, but I still really see that as like a really problematic part of dealing with our HIV contraction rates. And we have so many tools now with PrEP, with medications, but we're still seeing a rise in contraction rates annually in Texas. So we have all of these tools in place to actually do something about it, but I don't think that we're actually caught up on the current situation.
You're in DC, right, John? What's the situation in DC? I mean, what's the landscape look like there in terms of services? And as someone who is on PrEP.
Yeah, I think
well.
I'm not positive, but I think the maximum to get onto the DC Healthcare, which is Alliance, is like $41,000, but our median income is $108,000 a year.
Yeah, but that's considerably different from $10,000.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But we have the Whitman Walker Clinic, which is based in DC proper, and then they have branches that are located, I think like 4 of them, in different wards around the city. So it seems to me as if they're sort of facilitated and set up, but I don't know any.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So what do we think that these historical activist moments and also current activist moments have to tell us or have to help us in our current state? I mean, there's been the movement, the Truvada horror movement, which is
through Adam Zabowski, and then I forget the Mr. Los Angeles Leather, and then Aaron Baldwin.
Do you want to say a little bit about it? Do you want to say a little bit about? Yeah.
They're actually working now more with the San Francisco Health Department on Truvada horror to bring out pretty much Truvada horror as a way for them to publicly address their use of Truvada without the shamelessness of it. With Truvada being really new as a method for pre-exposure, there's still a lot of shaming with it for people that take it. There's a lot of people that claim that people that take Truvada are doing it just because they want to keep having risky or unsafe sex, without realizing that it's a measurement of prophylaxis that works through your entire body, and you could still use it in conjunction with condoms and other uses of,
I have to speak up here.
Yeah, please.
I mean, I'm really. It's hard because there are people who have disclosed that they're on PrEP or I'm totally opposed to it.
Yeah, why? This is by the way, this is a central tension, I think, and Larry and I, it's interesting, the 2 old people and AIDS activism are both totally opposed to healthy gay men taking Truvada, a very serious AIDS drug with known side effects and unknown side effects. And it's a drug you have to take every day. It only protects you against the potential of being HIV infected, whatever that may mean, and that's also in sort of flux what that means. The whole idea of undetectable, and I'm really like trying to figure out how not to attack your choices. I'm not. I think an informed choice is what people need to make, and I think that we're living in a period where there's very little real information and a huge amount of propaganda about going on these programs. Now,
the post-exposure is a whole other discussion, and I think that, but the one I want to concentrate on is PrEP. First of all, it makes you an identifiable class. Now, what do we know historically about identifiable class of homosexuals? A list with your name on it, okay? It's giving, this is not a new idea, by the way. In 1987, in San Francisco, at the height of the dark moment there, one organization wanted to give every healthy gay man AZT as a prophylaxis. The graying of San Francisco was away because you could see at that point when someone was on AZT, it physically, I could detect it, It didn't happen, but it came very close to it. And I think the medical community has always tried to figure out a way to, and I'm going to be really trashy and cheap here, find a new market, for their own services and for the pharmaceutical companies. The pharmaceutical companies were I was at the International AIDS Conference when this was first presented. They came out like cheerleaders, and sort of gut checked every young gay man. Are you brave enough? Are you gonna be like ACT UP? Are you gonna willing to put your, step up and do this? And I just want to say, please, talk it over with your friends. And if you're the friends, educate yourself about the whole picture here. And so when that informed choice happens, what's the criteria? Well, one of the studies, and it's still in a study experimental phase, by the way, was one unprotected anal intercourse incident. And they were trying to get 15 to 19-year-old young men of color who had had anal sex with a male. Okay? One unprotected meant that you qualified to be on this very serious drug.
So can I ask you something? When you think and when you talk about PrEP, I mean, one thing that I've noticed generationally is that a lot of people have a very visceral, almost bodily reaction to this conversation, and I kind of noticed you kind of getting a little antsy around it, and I want to think about that too, because there's also a way in which so for myself, who's someone who's born and raised in 1982, that there's a way that especially kind of queer male sexual activity gets mythologized. The pre-HIV/AIDS sexual activity gets mythologized. And so there's also, on the other side of the visceral body reaction, there's also a way in which those queer men, perhaps that were born in the age of HIV/AIDS, feel that they are working towards a kind of more liberatory sexuality for themselves. Now, you may contend with that partially because of the pharmacological associations with it, but I want to actually think about this tension.
If you believe in safe sex,
right?
There's nothing that you cannot do. Okay? I mean, this whole thing of safe sex is boring. I don't know about you, but I don't feel that guy coming in my ass, whether he's on a condom or he's not on a condom. And I challenge any bottom to tell me that they know the difference. But it's been romanticized.
That's right.
Raw. I want it raw, I'm sorry. I mean, if you believe that HIV is the cause of AIDS, then why the hell aren't you going after Lucasfilms and all of the pornography that is promoting unsafe sex? The activists have taken a hands-off position. ACT UP New York, I was at a meeting, the new ACT UP New York, I was at a meeting and someone got up and said, safe sex doesn't work.
So let's talk about that, because
some of us were in the room that are here to talk to you. I am getting at you.
No, I know. This is exactly and this is precisely the point that I want to. I don't want to agitate you, but this is precisely the point that I want to get to in terms of thinking about.
But I just want to say that
contemporary
one of the reasons
activist
that I'm antsy here is I'm trying to be respectful of people who have self-revealed of their choices. I'm not attacking the choice. I'm talking about the process of how you get there, and it's okay to say no to PrEP. Also,
of course.
So basically,
Sym,
I'm not 100% pro PrEP. However, I do see the fact that it does have a lot of pharmaceutical dependency on people that may or may not need it. The cost of it is also very outrageous. Gilead has their own copay assistance program, which can help in certain instances, but a lot of times you have to have fair insurance. The main reasons why I personally support PrEP is primarily because to be on it, you have to go to a doctor and get tested every 3 months. So it actually is taking a situation where people may not be getting tested every year when they should be getting tested every 3 months, and actually having a physical reminder that they need to be taking care of their own health in situations where things could happen. PrEP is...
What does that mean, situations where things could happen?
I mean, if you are someone that's having sex with multiple partners or anonymous sex, you should be getting tested every 3 months.
If you're having safe sex?
And that if you are having sex, and I'm not talking about safe or unsafe sex.
Well, I am.
And the other thing that I'm trying to make a
1
point here too is that you can be a bottom and you can plan to have safe sex and you can talk to your partners, but stealthing still exists. And there is people out there that will pretend to put on a condom.
Can you explain stealthing?
Stealthing is when someone will pretend to put on a condom and they actually won't, or they'll remove it during intercourse. So there's other situations too where you can be as safe as you think that you can be, and that still, there are situations that occur to where people can actually try to infect you. And that is a reality that we live in. And that is a reality that we have to think about. And
wait. You know, I mean, I'm not disputing that there's that kind of individual, but the mythology around the bug chasers and the bug givers, you know, which was made up in the beginning, in the first time that story was put out in Paz magazine, the guy made it up, the writer, and then people started to identify it. I think that happens. I'll tell you, close your sphincter muscle as fast as you can. If you think that person that's inside you is taken off that rubber or has put it in without one, you know, the bottom has some power there to make a decision too. And I would just want to say that to all the bottoms, male and female.
So I want to actually also include in this conversation how we foster or maintain an activism with, and part of the reason I wanted this to play out a little bit is because I think this is actually indicative of the state of the field in terms of kind of where generationally we are, and kind of thinking and talking about kind of especially kind of medication. How do we, I mean, what are some ways maybe that we move forward? Do we see a kind of splitting up of kind of activist communities? Do we see, I mean, I'm more interested in kind of, okay, so we're at this moment where we're at this kind of great impasse, and where both sides seem to be talking at each other a lot. How do we kind of draw on historical activist moments to forge new ways of moving forwards, or to kind of think about moving forward? That's really my...
By telling the truth. By telling the truth. But, you know, if you...
Right, which is, by the way, which truth, right, is debatable and contested right now. So
no, I'm talking about personal, authentic experience.
Good, thank you.
If let's say I as a top, if you can imagine, I as a top don't want to use condoms.
Mm-hmm.
Then I have to talk about why I don't want to use condoms in the face of what I'm told. Okay, I as a bottom, who really wants the intimacy of raw sex, whatever that may mean, but subjectively it means something powerful to me. Where does that desire come from? You know, and when we talk to each other about these things, rather than debate each other about what is correct, I think that we find the common space. And you know, I absolutely essentially believe that you control your body, no matter what I think about your behavior. I have no right to say you can't do this or you're fucking wrong. Mm-hmm. You know, I can choose not to have sex with you. I can choose not to be your friend. I can choose all those things. But it's to me essential in my gay male identity is that my body belongs to me. It's a trans issue. It's a woman's right to choose.
And that
issue.
may be a common core ground. Yeah. What about the place of performance? I mean, and kind of thinking through. I mean, for you, I mean...
Performance in terms of what?
In terms of, like, your practice and your performance practice. I mean, how do you see, say, performance entering into an activist realm or activist conversations that are happening now? Do you get some of these conversations and, say, talkbacks to your performances with the Derek Jarman stuff, or?
Well, you know, there's a really interesting response because especially when I went over to Europe to do it, is I think that people expected it to be a biopic, and it's not. It's not at all. I mean, it's really kind of trying to. It's more about sort of memory and archive and remembering the first experience of, oh, you know, when I was 16, I drove my Mustang into Philadelphia to Giovanni's bookstore, and I saw that VHS of Sebastian, and these are the flood. This is the flood of feelings that I had that I did not know what they were, and trying to sort of process that rather than saying Derek Jarman was this or this or this, and he lived this way and he did this and this, and really kind of like trying to wear the experience of seeing his work, experiencing his work on film, and trying to process my own coming to terms with being a fag and sexuality and things. So
do you think that there's maybe
beauty?
Yeah.
And beauty. Let's always remember that beauty is a part of this conversation too.
So do you think that there's a relationship between kind of telling personal narratives and stories as a kind of activist move here? I mean, part of what Jim was saying too was that, like, okay, I know that I can speak from my own position and speak it with my own kind of personal.
Yeah.
I
mean, do you see that as part of kind of the activist moment now?
But it's different than advocacy. You see, the artist talking authentically, and the political person talking about advocacy. Sure. There's a tension there.
Sure, but they're related. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, because it's the same thing. It's like when you brought up the issue of the symbology, the semiotics of queer culture, gay culture, the pink triangle. I did not know what the fuck that meant, but I was going to stick it on the back of my Mustang and ride up to school with it going, I'm something. But, like, I had no idea.
And by the way, you were something. Yeah. I just want to validate that for you. Yeah.
You know, and I kind of, you know, I went through life that way, and I got into, when I was a teenager, I did all these drugs, and I got into drugs, and it never really dawned on me to kind of, like, go, I should investigate why I'm doing this, or maybe what do these things mean? It was never something like that, you know. So I think part of this performance is finally looking back. So, like, I use home videos of myself as a child and then my family, but you know, it's very funny that these things were popping up when I was in the studio working, these images that I had no idea where the hell they were coming from. Like, maybe it's something I saw on JARMAN film, or it's just something. And then it wasn't until I re-edited these home videos to do this performance this weekend that the images were all embedded in them. The use of rabbits and fluorescent lighting and stuff. I had never made the connection. So I think this idea of having this sort of impacted memory is I'm finally learning why these things were going on, and I think I'm kind of approaching it that way and finally taking the opportunity to say, okay, I need to educate myself as being a part of the history, because I was born in 1977, but I also need to educate my own sort of personal relationship with these things, these symbols and signs. Yeah.
And do you see that too? Sym? Because you've I mean, as a speaker at QueerBomb, like, you've told your story, I mean, multiple times. I mean, there's, even here in introducing yourself, you kind of told, you know, your story. I mean, do you see that as kind of a key part of your kind of activist role?
Yeah, and for me, you know, as an activist, I don't really advocate for what I think should happen. I advocate for just kind of the situations that we're in. I can, of course, speak for myself, but mainly my goal as an activist is I don't even largely consider myself politically motivated. I really feel the connection to support other people that are in similar and overlapping situations to have better control over their own lives, to be represented more fairly in the art and their own expressions and their own lifestyles, to actually help give people the strength and the willpower to know that they can accomplish, you know, new and better things as queer people, and that it's not necessarily the end goal of what I want to see or what legal actions, you know, I want to see taken. I want to see our community grow stronger. I want to see artists become more empowered by their expressions. I want to see people in marginalized communities, you know, feel stronger for the things that they've experienced. And, you know, as a queer person, you know, I can't speak for the medical needs of trans people, but I can understand, the medical needs and seriousness of it as a person that has really had to suffer and to fight to have medical availability for a debilitating disease. So there's a lot of overlaps for that for queer people, to where we can have a lot of better understandings through overlapping situations, and that's really what I really like the most.
So I want to shift gears here because unfortunately we have to wrap down, but what we've been talking about, the telling of personal stories, I also want to remind people is a deeply feminist kind of move, right? I mean, the personal is political as a kind of key tenet of feminist movements, and I want to make sure that is acknowledged, and that the clear debt to feminism is acknowledged here. But I want us to break at this point and actually break away from the couch conversation format and have it be so that everybody can start having conversations with each other in a more kind of social atmosphere.
If we could, I know you have to leave, but Corinne has said that we can. This kind of conversation format, although it hasn't included you guys yet, and I'm hoping that it will. The ground rules are very different than most of the things I experience, particularly on the internet or online. Is that we see each other, we're looking at each other.
That's right.
We can disagree, we can listen, and we can maybe figure out what we have in common together. And that's what's so special for me about this kind of format. And thank you, Corinne, for doing it. And I know you have to go, but Corinne said if anyone wants to stay, we can
I want you to
continue.
keep talking.
Yeah.
And I think this is the moment to do it. So maybe grab some more coffee and let's keep chatting. So thank you for coming, and let's keep it going. Yeah.